Mount Everest is 849 meters above sea level. That is so high that the air contains only 1/3 of the oxygen at sea level. 1/3. At that altitude, without supplemental oxygen, the average human brain starts to fail in hours. The body shuts down. Decisions that would be easy at sea level become almost impossible. Climbers call everything above 800 meters the death zone. Not dramatically, literally. No human being can survive indefinitely above 800 meters. The body is dying the entire time you are up there. The only question is how fast. On May 10, 1996, both men had a combined total of about 25 clients between them on the upper mountain. Some of these clients were experienced mountaineers. Some were wealthy amateurs who had paid $65, $1,000 to be guided to the top of the world. All of them were on the mountain because they trusted Rob Hall and Scott Fisher to get them safely up and down. That trust created pressure, enormous pressure, because when someone has paid $65 and trained for years and is 300 meters from the summit, telling them to turn back is very hard, even when it is the right decision. Even when everything in you knows it is the right decision. The guides knew this. They had both thought about it. They had both made rules. Both Rob Hall and Scott Fisher had a rule, a turnaround time. The rule was simple. No matter where you are on the mountain, no matter how close to the summit, if you have not reached the summit by 2 p.m., you turn around. Why 2 p.m. specifically? Because getting down is harder than getting up. Because the afternoon is when weather deteriorates on Everest. Because if you are near the summit at 2 p.m., you will almost certainly be descending in darkness. Because you need enough oxygen and energy to get safely back to camp. 2 p.m. Turn around. No exceptions. This rule existed because experienced guides knew that most summit deaths happen on the descent, not the ascent. You push to the summit. You are exhausted, you are euphoric, your judgment is at its worst, your oxygen is running low, and you still have to get down. The turnaround time was not a suggestion, it was the most important rule on the mountain. On May 10, 1996, the turnaround time was broken, multiple times, by multiple people, including the guides, not carelessly, not through negligence, because the summit was so close, because clients had paid $65,000, because the weather seemed okay, because nobody wanted to be the one to say stop. The summit of Everest does something to people's decision-making, even the best of them. On May 10, 1996, the summit push began at midnight. By around 11:30 a.m., some climbers were reaching the summit. Some reached it at 2 p.m. After the turnaround time, some reached it at 3 p.m., well after. And as the last climbers were still ascending, the storm was building below. Everest storms can develop with terrifying speed. Within an hour, what had been a clear day became a whiteout. Visibility dropped to near zero. Temperature fell dramatically. Wind speeds increased to hurricane force. Climbers who had reached the summit and were now descending found themselves in complete whiteout conditions. No visibility, no landmarks, no way to tell which way was down. At altitude, in a storm, with oxygen running low. Rob Hall was near the summit with a client named Doug Hansen, who had turned back the previous year, had come back specifically to try again, and had summited at around 4 p.m. They were the last people near the top. The storm hit them fully. Rob Hall got Doug Hansen to the south summit, just below the true summit. Hansen was too weak to descend. Hall would not leave him. And that decision, the most human decision, the most understandable decision, is what killed them both. Guided expeditions, one led by New Zealand guide Rob Hall, one by American guide Scott Fisher, are both making summit bids from the south col of Everest. Combined, there are more than 30 people on the upper mountain, experienced climbers, paying clients, the best guides in the world. By midnight that night, Rob Hall spent the night on the south summit, at 700 meters, in a storm, alone. Doug Hansen had died. Hall was frostbitten, exhausted, and hypothermic, but he was alive. The next morning, May 11th, rescuers tried to reach him. They could not get through the storm and the extreme altitude. The rescue team reached within 200 meters of him. They could not get further. Hall was in radio contact with base camp, and base camp arranged something extraordinary. They patched through a satellite phone call from Rob Hall to his wife, Jan Arnold, who was 7 months pregnant in New Zealand. He told her he loved her. He told her he was sorry he would not be home. He asked her to name their daughter Sarah after a friend. He said goodbye. Jan Arnold later said that the call gave her enormous comfort, that he was calm, that they said everything they needed to say. Rob Hall died on the mountain that day. He was 35 years old. His daughter, Sarah Arnold Hall, was born 4 months later. The radio call is one of the most profound moments in the entire story of Everest. A man on a mountain saying goodbye to his family, with absolute clarity and love. Now I want to tell you about Beck Weathers, because his story is the most extraordinary survival story in the history of Everest. Beck Weathers was a 49-year-old pathologist from Texas, a paying client. He had a vision problem that he had not told his guides about. At altitude, his eyesight would deteriorate significantly, as it had before. During the ascent on May 10th, his vision failed. His guide, Rob Hall, told him to stay put on the mountain and wait, that Hall would collect him on the way down. Hall never came down. Weathers was left on the mountain as the storm hit. He was found, unconscious and near death, by other climbers late in the evening. They left him. They made the rational, terrible judgment that he was too far gone to save, that moving him would risk other lives. The next morning, he was still there, still alive, barely. He regained partial consciousness. He stood up. He walked, stumbling, half-blind, frostbitten, hypothermic, for about an hour back to camp. He was found at camp by other climbers who could not believe he was alive. He was airlifted off the mountain. He lost his nose. He lost his right hand. He lost the fingers of his left hand. He survived. Beck Weathers was left for dead twice on the highest mountain in the world. He walked off it. When the storm cleared on May 11th and 12th, the full extent of the disaster became clear. 8 people had died. Rob Hall, Scott Fisher, Doug Hansen, Andy Harris, one of the guides, Yasuko Namba, a 47-year-old Japanese climber who was the second woman to summit all 7 summits. 3 Sherpa climbers, 8 people. It was the deadliest day on Everest in the mountain's history at that point. The disaster was documented in extraordinary detail by John Krakauer, a journalist who was on the mountain as a client and wrote a book called Into Thin Air that became one of the best-selling mountaineering books ever written. Krakauer's account is gripping and honest. It is also, as several other survivors have noted, one person's perspective, written under enormous emotional stress shortly after the event. 8 of them are dead, not because of avalanches, not because of falls, because a storm arrived earlier than expected, and because of the decisions that were made, or not made, in the hours before it hit. This is the real story of the 1996 Everest disaster. And the decisions are more disturbing than the storm. Other survivors told different stories, had different recollections, saw things differently, as they always do, because no 2 people experience the same disaster the same way, especially not at 8,000 meters. Especially not in a storm. The truth of what happened on Everest on May 10th, 1996 is probably somewhere between all of those accounts. Complex, human, heartbreaking, and not easily reduced to heroes or villains. Everest has now been climbed by over 6,000 people. More than 300 have died on the mountain, and it keeps happening. Every year, climbers die on Everest. Some die from falls, some from avalanches, some from altitude sickness. Many die from the same combination of factors that killed people in 1996. A summit too close to turn back from, a deadline exceeded, a storm that arrived too fast. The commercialization of Everest has not stopped since 1996. If anything, it has accelerated. In some recent seasons, the queues near the summit have been so long that climbers have spent hours standing in the death zone waiting their turn, because there are too many people on the mountain at the same time. Because permits are sold. Because companies charge fees. Because the mountain has become an industry. Rob Hall understood this tension. He was part of the industry. He tried to do it responsibly. And he died, not because he was reckless, because he was on a mountain that does not care how experienced you are. That does not negotiate. That does not give second chances when the storm arrives. Everest is not a metaphor. It is a place and it is not forgiving. Here is what the 1996 Everest disaster taught me. There is a specific kind of dangerous thinking called summit fever. It is the state of mind where the goal becomes more important than the judgment required to achieve it safely, where turning back feels like failure, even when it is the wisest possible choice, where the sunk cost, the money spent, the years trained, the distance already covered, overrides the clear voice saying stop. Summit fever does not only happen on mountains, it happens in businesses, in relationships, in projects, in wars. The specific human, deeply relatable inability to stop when stopping is right. Rob Hall knew about summit fever. He had written about it. He had built rules specifically to prevent it. And on May 10, 1996, with a client 300 meters from the summit and a storm building below, the rules did not hold, because they were rules made by a man at sea level. And they were broken by a man in the death zone. I am not saying he was wrong to stay with Doug Hansen. I genuinely do not know what I would have done. Nobody does until they are there. But I can say this. The mountain does not care about your reasons. It does not care about the money you paid. It does not care how close you are to the top. It just keeps being cold, and high, and indifferent. And the only person who can decide when to turn back is the one standing on it. If incredible true stories like this are your thing, told honestly, the way they deserve, you already know what to do. Let me explain the death zone properly, because everything about this story depends on understanding it. Above 800 meters, the human body is actively dying. Every hour you spend there, you are losing ground you cannot get back. Your brain, starved of oxygen, starts making poor decisions. Things seem clearer than they are, dangers seem smaller. The will to continue overrides the instinct to retreat. Your body, in an attempt to stay warm, diverts blood from the extremities. Your fingers and toes, and eventually your nose and ears, begin to lose their blood supply. This is the beginning of frostbite. Your lungs are working so hard that they can become waterlogged. This is called high-altitude pulmonary edema. It can kill you in hours. Your judgment is compromised. Your perception of time is distorted. Your emotional regulation is impaired. And all of this is happening to people who are also physically exhausted from days of climbing, sleeping at altitude, carrying heavy packs. The summit of Everest is often compared to the surface of Mars in terms of survivability. The guides on Everest, Rob Hall, Scott Fisher, and others, were not just climbing a mountain. They were managing all of this, for themselves and for their clients, while making critical decisions, in the cold, in the dark, and eventually, in a storm. The 1996 Everest season was the most commercially active in the mountain's history at that point. 2 main guided expeditions are relevant to our story. Rob Hall was a 35-year-old New Zealander. He had summited Everest 4 times. He had guided 39 clients to the top. He was widely considered the best high-altitude guide in the world. His company, Adventure Consultants, charged $65 per person. Scott Fisher was a 40-year-old American, charismatic, powerful, a legendary climber. His company, Mountain Madness, also charged around $65 per person.